welcome. It's so great to finally catch up with you, Ed. Definitely been long overdue. I cannot wait to actually head down your way when we get down to. I know Alex is trying to figure out a time for us all to get together.
I would
Um,
love that.
Ed is a recruiter, and I think what we wanted to try to start chatting about today are some of the things that we see in job search from our different perspectives. Because I know, especially ever since I started at Leac Harrison, and we were just chatting about this. I see a lot of great resumes from a lot of great people from a lot of different places, and it's how do you reply to them as a coach or as a branding person in a diplomatic and respectful way without them taking it personally and getting defensive. And I would say
Right.
to you, you're going to get a resume from a someone else, or you're going to have a conversation with someone. So what's the conversation like? I have a script I go by to be very
Sure.
careful. So when someone sends you a resume, first you put a job spec out, and the
Mhm.
understanding is that you're going to mostly have the ability to do the job. But
Right.
then
Right.
is that even a reach to say that right off the bat that you're expecting people to reply to you that can do the job, or you're just getting anything and
No,
everything?
that I'm getting anything and everything. I don't recall if we've ever spoken of this before, Ken.
Okay.
But years ago, in one of my very first jobs in external recruiting,
Uh-huh.
um, me and the team would put up job posts, and after a while, we discovered this guy that I came to call Superfan. And Superfan, God bless him, um, and we were doing IT recruiting, right?
Hmm.
So like developers and security people and network engineers and things of that kind, PMs, right?
Hmm.
All things that have a fairly serious set of, hey, you need to have these things to apply, and he had none of them, not a blessed one. Um, but bless his heart, Superfan applied for literally every single job, and I think within hours of it being posted. We've never understood what his thought process in doing this was. None of us ever had a good theory. It might have been that Department of Labor, for uninsurance employment purposes, may require a certain amount of job
Hmm.
applications to keep a
Right.
claim live. I know we both know that's a thing that can happen.
Right.
Um, we've never found a good answer to it, but there he was, month after month, job post after job post, every single time without fail. And it got to the point where as soon as any of us saw him,
Right.
reject. We just did because we knew what the resume looked like. What, he's going to change it within 24 hours to develop a new set of qualifications we never knew about? Nah.
So how do you manage expectations? Because I
Hmm.
may think I have the qualifications. I really
Sure.
may, because I may be able to do a lot of the things, but I know
Sure.
in the back of my mind, I've been told maybe job specs aren't all correct or this or that. But at the same time, I don't want to waste your time. And then you're going to become
Right.
that much overwhelmed. And like, what is Ken thinking? So I'm not even sure what
So,
the answer is. That's why I kind of wanted to get it from your
right.
perspective.
Right. And the fact of the matter is, this is actually a very, very difficult question to answer for anyone,
Hmm.
right? Um, because, and this is something I've said myself, as a matter of fact, if never to you, then certainly to others. Um, if you ever want to make a recruiter laugh, you ask them, look them right in the eye, and you ask them, when's the last time you saw a job posting, a job description that was accurate, complete, and current? And then step back a few because you're going to be deafened by the laughter. Okay. One of the challenges, and technologists who are listening or watching, you may recognize this one in particular. One of the challenges with any job posting, any job description that is out there, is that this is standard Office document. It is not custom created for every single opportunity. It is
Hmm.
a standard Office document. Now, I want you to think about the standard Office documents that you have worked with in your careers. Are they not subject to versioning? Are they not a document that has, if you look at the file, like the originally created like 12 years ago, heaven knows how many iterations it's been through since
Hmm.
then. It's been updated, obviously. And so maybe that software developer position that you're looking at was originally written 12 years ago,
Hmm.
and spoke of doesn't even talk about DevOps or CI or CD. Maybe it's still talking about waterfall as a software development
Right.
methodology, right? And these are all things that have, in the last 12 years, kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why you see sometimes these really out of date things, or you'll see a requirement that's calls for, oh, well, we want to see like 8 years of experience with this technology, which has only been around for 3 years, by the way.
Really? Okay.
Right. So this versioning thing is very much a thing that also affects job posting. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. But let's get to the broader point of what you're saying, right? Um,
Well, let me walk through a scenario.
sure.
You send me a job spec for a QA.
Yep.
I've done QA.
Okay.
Okay. I've done QA all over the place, all different places. I know how to do a test script. I know how to do this.
Mhm.
Would it be okay? Maybe I don't send you my resume. Would it be okay for me to follow up with you to ask about more specific information, or is that just a time drain on your part? I mean,
Well,
let's, and then that's kind of where I'm kind of going is
okay, sure.
where's the line between, yeah.
Here's the thing, right? It's still a total black box
Okay.
because you don't know if I'm drowning in requirements
Okay.
or if I actually have some time and bandwidth to, engage in conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, typically, under normal circumstances, most recruiters are going to say, I don't have the bandwidth to have this kind of conversation in a meaningful and substantive way
Mm-hmm.
that does honor to your inquiry. I think there are some that will, and they're great. And I try to be that when I
Mm-hmm.
can, but I'm not always great at it either. All right.
Right.
Now, I said under normal circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
but if you've been paying attention to the last 4 quarters of what's been happening to people in the recruiting profession, these are not normal circumstances by any
Right.
stretch. So it is possible that they may actually have the bandwidth to have these conversations with you, but you're never going to know unless you reach out. And therefore, what does it hurt to ask the question? You know,
Right.
nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? There's a saying that's a saying for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Take that shot.
So I'm going to call out some people. Leon Darmody was the first one on the call today.
Liam!
Yes, Craig Reynolds, Scott
Hey, Craig.
Verhagen. Alex, of course, is here, and I love when Alex is here because Alex has a question, and it's a question um, that he's probably asking on behalf of others. How do you go about selecting the right keywords to use when selecting candidates? Do you use the job description exclusively?
Very rarely, Alex. It's a
Okay.
really fabulous question. I'm really glad you
Right.
asked it. And it's something I talk about every now and again myself. Um, the keywords I go on are what the hiring manager has told me they really want.
Mm-hmm.
So let us say that I'm looking for a project manager.
Mm-hmm.
If you work in corporate America for a meaningful amount of time, you know what a project manager is. You know
Right.
what their responsibilities are, right? They have to herd cats, which a particular PM of my acquaintance has always rolled into his elevator speech. Um, and there's a lot of accountability and um, a lot of informal influencing, right? Because you don't have that direct reporting line to say, "Oh, no,
Mm-hmm.
that you need to do this." So maybe part of it is going to be, okay, what kinds of projects have you led? What were the sizes of the budgets that you led? And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that's not things that people put on their profiles and not but usually on the resume.
Right.
But I usually am looking at the profile, not the resume. So I still want to see some level of detail if I can get it about what kind of projects you delivered. Like there's PMs who specialized for a time in doing data center moves,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a whole thing in its own right. There's so many very specific things that need to take place in a data center move that I get why there's PMs who specialized in it. But now that a lot of shops have made a cloud transition, what now?
So what's the process for a company wants to hire person A, and
Sure.
they reach out to you
Hmm.
because you have a relationship with the company, you have an understanding. So do you talk them through the job specs first? Do you just wait to hear from them and then kind of go back and forth? And then what's the candidate mission? Because that's something most people really don't hear
Okay.
that often. And I think that's, if
So
you're okay with that, I'd love to hear
yeah,
that.
sure, sure. Because the fact is, what I do for a living is shrouded in mystery for a lot of folks.
Sure.
Um, oh fiddlesticks.
What?
Give me just a sec, Ken. I just realized that I need to charge my laptop.
Okay, we'll carry on without you for a sec.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm so sorry about this. I thought I addressed this.
No problem. No problem. So
All
in
right.
the
Be right
meantime,
back.
no problem. While we wait for Ed to come back, I want to definitely welcome some people into the call, and Ed promised we'll be back. One of the questions I definitely want to ask him about is the whole open to work thing too. So welcoming Meryl here, Catherine, and Sue. A little bit of a history about Ed. Ed and I first met probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we met indirectly. We met through his comments because he would write all these different great articles. So when we get Ed back, we're going to definitely, can we play elevator music, Liam? I don't know. I mean, I can try to sing, which is probably the best you can hope for. But as Brenda always tells me, it's about preparing for any possibility that goes on. What I would say from my perspective as someone now who speaks to recruiters, I'm able to find out from them a little bit more than just the job spec. And what I always like to find out from them is what have been the questions that hiring managers have had actually, or things that have not been worked out. Because I think the most important thing to think about is that if you know as a recruiter what is or is not working with other candidates, then it helps you when it goes to the next applicant. I've worked with some great recruiters, and they will say, "Well, these are the things this is the feedback that I've actually heard from the hiring manager." And when Ed gets back on the call, we're definitely going to have that conversation about that because I think it is so important to understand recruiters are not the enemy here. I mean, those of you that are recruiters, I totally get it. You're in a different situation than job seekers, but the common concern is about just the best communication effort. And he's back. Yay. All right, Ed. Can't hear you. Unmute. One, one, two, three. Can't hear you. Now we go.
Here
Yes.
we go. Sorry
So
about that.
I promise not to sing too much, but I definitely wanted to get the understanding, the perspective from
Sure.
the time that because I think that helps us out a lot too. Because again, the
Sure.
more that they understand, the better.
Right. Right. Look, more information is only going to help. Right.
Hmm.
So here's the thing. I'm going to walk you through the life of a job posting.
Sure.
Okay. In the beginning, the hiring manager says, "Oh, I need headcount," and then must go and obtain budgeting for headcount.
Hmm.
And this may go on for months or quarters. And all the while, the hiring manager is thinking, I want this person to do this, that, or the other thing. Budgeting gets approved. Great. Headcount gets approved. Hooray. And now, does the amount I wanted still work for what my need is? Because it could have evolved over that
Hmm.
time, right? Maybe I need someone more senior, or maybe I actually don't need someone quite as senior as I thought originally.
Hmm.
And then, okay, what does that do to the qualifications that I need in terms of what this person is going to do? And this is all stuff that happens that is invisible to everyone who is not the hiring manager or or up uh, in their org line, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so eventually, when it comes to me, again, I'm a corporate recruiter, so it works differently for me versus an external recruiter.
Hmm.
But what happens to me is I get a notification. I've been assigned a requirement. Now I'm aligned to particular business units
Hmm.
within my employer. I typically recruit IT. Every now and again, I'll also pitch in with HR and sometimes a couple other BUs, but chiefly it's going to be IT when I get it.
Hmm.
Um, and most of the hiring managers I support, I've done at least a little hiring for them before, some more than others.
Hmm.
So I know what they're looking for, but I always have what is generally referred to by recruiters as an intake call. Some people don't love this term, But because it's the lingua franca, this is the term I use. So just for simplicity's sake. And
Mm-hmm.
during the intake call, I will ask, okay, I know what the job posting, what the office document says, right?
Mm-hmm.
How is what you are looking for different from this? Help me understand that. What are the particular drivers? Why does this opportunity exist? Are we backfilling? Is this growth?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if it's a backfill, what do you want to do differently with this hire, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe didn't happen last time, right? And so those are the critical things. And that's actually going back to Alex's question of like 10 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is what informs some of the keywords that I'll be looking for, at least qualities that I will look for during my phone screen.
So the other question that comes up a lot too, and before I
Mhm.
do that, I just want to put I have not heard from Susan P. Joyce in a
Oh,
very long time.
Susan!
Yes.
Oh, how
Um,
wonderful.
Good to understand the process. Is LinkedIn necessary for most jobs or for most professional jobs, etc.? And I
Oh,
I want to piggyback with that with one thing, which is your feeling, because I asked this of everyone about open to
sure.
work on LinkedIn.
Okay. Number one, open to work. If there's a recruiting professional who says open to work is not a good idea, I want to talk with that person right now because you're wrong, period. Look, not every person who is a recruiter has access to the LinkedIn Recruiter account. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is hideously expensive. You can either get LinkedIn Recruiter or you can get a very, very nice car. That's what it costs. Okay, people. So people don't hand these things out, and I'm giving you that information so you have the appropriate context. Um, I'm a big, big believer in the power of context. Um, in LinkedIn Recruiter specifically, if you have access to this license, you can filter specifically for people who are open to work. Now, most recruiters do not have this. They can't have it because it's really, really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time your employer invested an entire luxury car in giving you resources to do your job? Right? I mean, come on, guys, think about that. So it's not a common resource. Um, and therefore, the banner is a great way to communicate the same thing without needing to depend on a recruiter who has access to this hideously expensive product. All right. Um, let's go back to Susan's question, which I know,
I'll put
uh,
back up. I'll put back up.
yeah, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure,
I want to make sure I'm
absolutely,
capturing it. Okay,
absolutely.
so with respect to the recruiting process, when you come right down to it, in the corporate world, if you're conducting a job search, you de facto we can say that having LinkedIn is optional. This is only strictly speaking optional, the very most technical sense, like looking both ways before you cross a busy highway is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's how technically optional it is in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of recruiters, the vast majority of whom are servicing the corporate world, are going to use LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
There are recruiters who actually don't know how to find talent outside of LinkedIn. There are others. And there are many ways, right? Your various job
Right, right.
portals, having a personal website, and all manner of other techniques.
So I had a candidate at a workshop this morning say that she was told executive recruiters do not use LinkedIn to find prospective executives. Can you dispel this notion?
I can't really speak to that because I don't do executive recruiting,
Okay.
not in the way that an executive recruiter would. A lot of times when you're talking about executive recruiters, these are people who have built up a practice over a very long period of
Mm-hmm.
time and have a very deep Rolodex of people they've worked with, have probably hired for in the past, and therefore they have some very deep relationships they can leverage
Right.
for this kind of work. Now, are there people who recruit at the executive level using LinkedIn? Yes, absolutely. and I have done some of this.
I would say a lot of it is just, I would think of it's mainly a reference tool as much as anything else when they do that.
Yeah, I think it's much more of reference checking,
Right,
or relationship building or vetting, right?
right. So, how do recruiters handle referrals? For example, a person gets referred to a hiring manager, hiring team outside of the recruiter. How does this play into the recruiter's process?
Barry, that is a great question. I'm so glad that you asked it. Listen, there's not a recruiter alive who doesn't love referrals. Not one. They love referrals, provided that this is a referral is someone who actually makes sense, right? I mean, if you're flogging your nephew's resume at me and for a senior level position and he's wrapping up his junior year in college, that's not going to cut it.
Hmm.
And I also now I'm going to be looking more carefully at people you might refer afterwards. So be
Hmm.
judicious of when you refer people, you know. Um, if there's a qualifier, make that real clear. Because
Hmm.
otherwise, we think it comes with a full endorsement of of the trust and relationship that we have built with you over time. So that's really, really important. Now, how does it work? If the employer is one that offers a referral bonus, they'll get one. Now, that's typically available only to current employees.
Okay.
Um, Most employers don't offer one to external parties. Some do, and that's great when they do. They'll plaster all over their
Hmm.
website when they do.
So, this was a question that came up from Lisa. Do recruiters ever reach out to professional associations to find people
Yep.
first?
My very first job in recruiting, I worked for a company that was helping to install home automation equipment.
Hmm.
To do this kind of work, the skill set is typically referred to as the cable guy, right?
Hmm.
Complete with Jim Carrey mental image, you know.
Hmm.
But it also means electricians, and typically licensed electricians in certain jurisdictions, and sometimes at a certain minimum threshold of being licensed.
Hmm.
Um, and so, where do you talk to? Well, who is responsible for licensing in that jurisdiction? Let's talk to those guys. They're going to know all of the licensed electricians, which is exactly what I've done on several occasions.
So, what are some of the questions that a person should not ask a recruiter? I mean, like, because I mean, there are some things a recruiter. I mean, so
Mhm.
let's. So I'm looking for a job. I'm reaching out to you. What are the questions you wish we would never ask, or job seekers would never ask?
Gosh,
That bad, huh?
that's actually a very good question for which I don't have a great answer because the thing is, the spread is so wide. I don't think there's a lot of commonalities that lend themselves
Hmm.
to a really strong, clear answer, at least for me.
Hmm.
Um, Having said that, a couple that I will say are please don't do this. Not necessarily questions that you shouldn't
Hmm.
ask.
Right.
But if I know you're going to ask me what the compensation range is. You know, I'm going to counter with, okay, well, what are you looking for? We're going to do that dance. We're going to finally, someone's going to give a number. Honestly, I don't care because, frankly,
Hmm.
I don't love that dance, and I don't know that anyone does. Um, I will tell you where in the range eventually I feel
Hmm.
like you fit.
Right.
At some point, you may want to revisit this, and that's okay. Tell me
Hmm.
that if you want to, that you're going to want to revisit. I would appreciate that a great deal. Because otherwise, I presented you to the hiring manager at X compensation. And then if you come back and change that, then the manager says, oh, I don't know that I have approval for this kind of budget now. And then they have to go through an entire round of approvals potentially. So that's always a bit of a challenge when people do it. I get that you need to ask or you won't get. I respect that, and you got to do what's best for you. Absolutely. Just understand that there could be a complication,
Hmm.
potentially delay, and the delay it introduces may not necessarily be desirable. So think about the war, not the battle.
And I think it's important for people to understand that there are different types of recruiters. You're a
Yep.
corporate recruiter.
Right.
There are the per diem ones that may be with an agency, whether it's a Robert Half or something like that, and they get their leads from different companies. And then there's the offshore ones. So I think it's important to know the type of relationship you have with the
I think that
recruiter.
I think it's absolutely critical to understand what kind of recruiter you're talking to. Now, the vast majority of the workforce is accustomed to dealing with external recruiters
Hmm.
because there's a whole lot more, right? There just are. It is. I don't know what the stats are on this, and frankly, it's beyond the scope of this conversation.
Hmm.
But
Right.
listen, for every recruiting firm you've heard of, whether that be Randstad, Robert Half, what
Hmm.
have you, right? There's literally dozens of people who have been very successful. They are branched off and opened up their own businesses because they got tired of working for someone else, and they're going to do the same thing they've done, right? Because they're entrepreneurs, and that's part of the vision for success. There are countless agencies out there. So this is why the vast majority of the workforce has encountered external recruiters rather than
Hmm.
necessarily internal ones, and especially in tech. Like Ken, before you became a coach, you were a BA. How many recruiters did you talk with that were not external in that career?
I talked to quite a few, and what I found was a lot of the recruiters had no clue what I actually did.
Right, right.
So that the first part became an education process, and some
Yep,
of them were actually cold calling on behalf of other recruiters at the company. So
yep.
you knew that right off the bat. So I'd look them up on LinkedIn. I'm like, this is not the recruiter person, but you want to be respectful because they have a job to do. But I would ask them very pointed questions about
Sure,
the position. To show as much as I knew what I was talking about as anything else.
sure.
And if you have to get back to me and say, let me check, I respect that because you may not know. But it's a difference between getting back and not even having the answer.
Yeah. And it's also how much do they have to get back to you about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like some fairly straightforward stuff. Like for you, what software development methodology do you use? Are you waterfall? Are you
Mm-hmm.
agile? Are you using
Right.
Prince because you're British? Um, if they don't know that, that's pretty that's pretty basic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they should. It's a part of a software project.
So
Um,
Alex had another question. You once told me I have 12 minutes to interview candidates, 3 minutes to write a report, and have to do four people an hour. So, from your perspective, do you have certain times of the day that you do different things? Or is it a block out schedule that way? I mean,
so I'm trying to remember when I would have said that to Alex because I feel like it was probably a while back
could be.
because my process has evolved over time, as has the kind of as has the kind of
Hmm.
uh, talent that I also recruit for, by the way. Um, I think it really depends. Most recruiters will tell you that they need a certain minimum amount of time to conduct the phone screen with someone. Um, I but we all laboriously take notes, right?
Hmm.
This whole reason why we talk with you in the first place, because we're gonna take notes.
Hmm.
Um, and when I'm conducting a screen, I usually am
Hmm.
telling whoever I'm talking with, listen, I'm taking notes as we talk. That's what the typing is that you hear. You know, I think most people, especially because I'm typically talking with people who are experienced, know to expect it.
Hmm.
Um, these days, I budget 30 minutes for a phone interview,
Hmm.
unless it's for a salesperson or a more senior role. Like a line manager, I can probably fit into 30 minutes. When you start
Right.
talking more senior, I need to start budgeting like a full hour. Salespeople, I almost always budget an hour
Hmm.
because salespeople, guess what? They know their accomplishments. They're happy to tell you. It might take a little
So,
bit.
so this brings up another question I get a lot too, and it's related to this.
Sure.
Handling the office requirement of remote versus hybrid and finding talent. Let's say the suspect that's hybrid, and maybe after a month or 2 months, it becomes in the office, or maybe it changes later on. And I know that this is probably something, there's no one right answer for this.
There really isn't. You're right.
And
Um,
but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
sure. I'll be honest. My absolute one of my rules about the way that I do my job is transparency. I'm never going to come at you with, "Hey, this is hybrid," knowing full well we're bait and switching you into fully on site.
Hmm.
Because what happens if I do that? Even if you accept what I say at face value, you come on board, you discover the second week that it's all on site. And by the way, everyone has known for months. You're out of there. You are updating your resume and you're resuming your job search immediately because you're pretty steamed that
Hmm.
I lied to you. The interviewers lied to you. No
Hmm.
one gave you enough respect to tell you the truth all along the way. I mean, you have been treated with contempt if that happens.
Hmm.
I'm not doing that. I spent too long having been a job seeker to treat people like that as a recruiter.
And you bring up a good point. You were in transition. You were as a job seeker too,
I
so you
was.
definitely have an empathy, just like me, to the
Yeah,
process. And
I do.
I can't tell you the number of times that I've reached out to someone, and I'll get, well, the job is put on hold, and then it gets put back with just 2 or 3 lines in the job spec, and that, not saying that's you, but then it's like, can I reapply for the job because it's a different job, or what's
Right.
going on here? I mean, that whole dilemma thing.
Yeah, there's a bit of a cycle there. And that the thing is, as the recruiter, because it's almost certainly always going to go to the same person,
Hmm.
right? In terms of the person who's actually looking at the applicants and doing the proactive search for talent.
Right.
That should almost always go to the same person because, they know already what's going on. Um, and that should lie with the recruiter to reach out proactively to people who already applied or
Hmm.
expressed interest and say, listen, I know that you see the new version of it. Yes, we should talk about it. No, we shouldn't talk about it. Here's why. I think that's just professional courtesy to tell people, listen, we completely rethought what we're doing, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing you do a blast email for,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and a good applicant tracking system allows the recruiter to do exactly that.
Hmm.
Go out to those people who are associated with the previous job posting, communicate with them. There's a new job version of this job posting. Please review it. If you feel like this still makes sense, absolutely do apply, please. But please note these changes.
Okay. So, what do you have a pipeline of candidates that you kind of have on the back burner? Let's say there's someone
Hmm.
that is a finalist for a job, but you know
Hmm.
they're really good, and you figure at some point you may get a similar type job.
Oh yeah,
Do you keep that off
oh
to the
yeah,
side?
oh yeah. Every recruiter who's been doing this for a meaningful amount of time, especially on the corporate side, but also on the agency side,
Hmm.
we know that having those relationships can be very helpful to us. Um, there's a guy that we have been talking with in some way, shape, or form for a year and a half that I know of,
Hmm.
possibly longer. He requires a certain level of seniority, and it's not the kind of seniority that just shows up all over the place, right? It's not an everyday thing. But anytime the right seniority comes up, you better believe I'm thinking about him and saying, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And every now and again, maybe it does make sense, but it doesn't. And then I'll
Hmm.
proactively let him know, hey, listen, you're going to see this. This is not the right fit. I'm going to tell you why, and I want you to have that awareness to save you the trouble and agita. Because this is hard. This is an unbelievably hard thing sometimes. And people need to know that there are others who are looking out for them too sometimes.
And it's got to be so much harder as a recruiter. I thought way early on I could be a recruiter.
Hmm.
When I was in transition, I thought, how hard can it be? I can build a relationship. I kind of know what the job specs are. I can figure
Hmm.
out a couple of people that I can certainly put in front of someone. And hey, it's a great way to make money. So that's the naive me of many years ago. And a couple
Sure.
of recruiter friends that I respect very highly said, Ken, you've got to be blank kidding me. It's not that easy.
Uh, one of the things I think that people who've never done this job don't appreciate about it is that even when it's a corporate recruiting job, it has the same emotional peaks and valleys to it that a sales job does.
Hmm.
And therefore, even more so when we are talking about external recruiting. It does. With every posting, with every job, sometimes even with certain candidates, you
Hmm.
go through a roller coaster of emotion about it because, you are a little invested in these folks.
Hmm.
You're invested in whoever the hiring manager is or the client if you work external,
Hmm.
you know, because you And like if in on the external side, this is just good business sense. You want to make sure you are servicing the client need, that you're hitting the target for what they asked for, right?
Hmm.
When you're an internal recruiter, okay, listen, I need to get this leader taken care of. I want to make sure my targeting is
Hmm.
right,
Right.
you know? And so I genuinely feel in my heart of hearts that I put this resume forward, this person has a good chance of moving on to the next round,
So,
right?
is it okay to ask a recruiter
Mhm.
after the conversation about the timeline for the job,
Oh,
about
absolutely.
how often they can get back to you? Because I think that's another question I get is a week too short? Is 2 weeks too long? Is it a day? What is, and I don't want to
So
be a pest, but at the same
right,
time, I want to show interest.
right. You wanna walk that line
Exactly.
between getting what you need, but also not being a pain, right?
Right.
And so here's what I'm gonna propose. Always ask, if I don't hear from you within X amount of time, when is a good time to follow up? Right? Because situations can be different, like radically different, depending on seniority, depending on timing, depending on
Mhm.
other factors going on with that recruiter that you may not be aware of, like maybe they're going on vacation the following week, right? Um, and so most recruiters are aware enough to tell you these sorts of things, but we're also sometimes distracted because we're trying to do like five different things all at once, like most people in the work in the working world, right? Um, So ask that question, get us centered and back 100% into the conversation and force us to look at the question and give you the answer that you need, right?
Right.
That I think is really the critical thing. I don't think that it's helpful to prescribe that you do X or Y or Z. I think it's much more helpful to treat this as a dialogue,
Hmm.
right? And you know what your agenda is. Do I want this job? Am I as qualified as I think I should be for this job? Okay, great. How do I ensure maximize my chances of getting it?
So just this is being recorded. First of all, Mike, I don't know what issue there might be. The other question I want to ask: everyone says send a thank you note. Totally
Uh-huh.
think that's a great idea. What types of things would you suggest, or do you want to see in a thank you note, or things that are like best practices? Because we all say you should thank them for the time, you should thank them
Yep.
for this.
Mhm.
But is there anything else you want to really see that might be better or helpful? If you don't mind sharing again.
I don't. I don't. Ken, I'm going to put this in terms that you and I particularly can appreciate.
Okay, sure.
Okay. On your LinkedIn profile, do you share when your birthday is to your network?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, because truthfully, I want to respect a certain level of privacy.
Mhm.
It's not important.
Okay. So I don't either, and I haven't for years. And my driver for this is that I get bombarded with literally hundreds of messages, literally hundreds.
Mhm.
And listen, I'm not complaining about having a network. I'm not complaining about people thinking enough to do this. I
Mhm.
am, however, saying, guys, if you're going to do it, make it meaningful. So I've turned it off. But like you, obviously, there is certainly a bit of a desire for privacy.
Mhm.
Now, if you're going to send a thank you, don't send a thank you just because everyone tells you to do so. Okay. Now, recruiters are unsurprisingly not hitting a consensus on this. Some of us like
Mhm.
them, some of us are
Right.
meh. You know, there's probably some that outright dislike them. But I'll tell you what, if you send a thank you to my hiring manager, and maybe you don't have that person's contact information, but you send it to me instead, you better believe I forward it immediately on my seeing it because this still remains super rare.
Really.
Still, I see it maybe 5% of the time. Maybe.
I've had recruiters actually send me the text for how to send a thank you note as
That's
part of the follow up, and
okay.
they said this is
That's
what I would
impressive.
suggest you send hello blank, and they have in some basic template text, which I think is a great idea if you're really going to be that lazy or something to do
Right.
that.
But you also kind of hope that it's a self selecting enough group that you're sufficiently self motivated. You don't need the help.
I agree, but I mean, it's one of
No,
those
I get
things
it.
where sometimes people don't know what they don't know, and
It's
that's why
true. It's true.
when you and I chat, we're talking in a much different language than
True.
other people are because we've been through this in different ways, and I think hearing things from your perspective helps a lot because I sense some of these things, but it's not the same thing as being in the dealing with it every day,
Sure.
in the trenches, if you will, for another thing we have in common.
Sure. Okay. Okay.
Because I'm sure I don't know I don't know how many candidates you get. We get inundated with candidates, all of us. And I have people reaching
Sure.
out to me asking for help and support. And my answer to them is, can you be specific? I am happy to help you, but it's not helping you get a job. I mean, maybe I
Right.
can get you closer to that, but you have to be specific. And if you can't be specific to me, how are you going to be specific to someone else? And it's just an observation.
Sure. Now, I am very familiar with the phenomenon you're describing. I'm sure you're shocked to hear me say that. Um, one of the things that one of the ways I've been spending my time in the last several years when I'm not recruiting, when I'm not otherwise trying to help job seekers, is I answer questions on a website called Quora.
Okay.
Now, Quora is all about asking questions and getting answers.
Hmm.
And one of the common complaints I encounter on that site is people will ask a question that's very general. And okay, sure, I can write a 2, 3 word answer that strictly speaking answers the question. Does that really add value to whoever asked? Because they almost certainly meant quite a bit more than
Right.
that, right? So, can you help me with a job search? Yes. That isn't the answer to the question, right?
Yes.
I mean, that is not a useful, that is not a well-formed, that is not a productive question to ask. A better way to ask the question might be, listen, I am a foreign exchange student graduating from a master's program in such and such program from such and such university. I am looking to begin a career in this field.
Hmm.
I am open to relocating anywhere within the US, but I also will require sponsorship after 3 years. Now, this is an extremely common phenomenon. And I think, Ken, you and I have talked about this, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and now this is something I can do something with.
Hmm.
I can offer that person meaningful assistance. I do not have a job for them, but I can at least point them at appropriate resources,
Sure.
right? Because remember, if the answer is I cannot help you, your entire outreach is failed, right? What you want to do is position the person you're asking so that if you cannot get to this level of assistance, at least get to this level of assistance, right?
Right.
And you don't make it an all or nothing thing because very often you're going to get nothing.
So Lisa has a couple of different questions, but let me put them up one
Sure.
after the other so it's easier that way. The
Sure.
one question is about cover letters, just a
Okay.
perspective. And then
Mhm.
the other question is resumes written by ChatGPT. How are you dealing with this? So I know
Okay.
there are two different topics, but I
They
figure
are.
this way we can talk them both through.
Okay. I talk with a lot of recruiters. I've been
Uh-huh.
talking with a lot of recruiters since before I became a recruiter 11 years ago.
Hmm.
So understand what I say comes from that standpoint. This is informed by conversation with hundreds, if not thousands, of other professionals who do what I do for a living. For the most part, we do not care about cover letters to us. However, as a job seeker ally, I still advise that you offer one. And the reason I say this is because you don't write it for me, you write it for my customer. You write it for the hiring manager. And if I can present to hiring manager, look, some of them love them, some of them are meh. I don't think I've encountered a hiring manager anywhere that hates them. So I have a post about this from a couple of months back. But
Hmm.
basically, for those of you who are familiar with old-timey philosophers, I want to remind those of you who know about him, and inform some of you who don't, about René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, thinker, and all-around genius. Oh wait, no, I'm thinking of Pascal. Excuse me, Blaise Pascal rather, who also similarly meets all of those criteria. By the way, Pascal, best known probably to a lot of us because there's an entire programming language named for him.
Right.
Um, People don't use it to do much, but it certainly was very popular as an instructional tool for a very long time. Pascal, being the man of letters that he was put forward a protheism argument once. And his argument was, well, between the positions of theism and atheism, and mind, he, as a Frenchman from the 17th century, his frame of reference was strictly within the context of Catholicism.
Mhm.
Okay. So if your choices are atheism or Catholicism, the logical choice is actually Catholicism because you risk very little by behaving as a Catholic, and whereas if you are an atheist, you risk potentially eternal suffering, right? And that's become known as Pascal's wager. Now, there are hiring managers who love cover letters. There are hiring managers who are about cover letters. But do you want to take that chance? Are you sure? Wouldn't you rather have it and
Mhm.
not need it? Which, by the way, is actually an expression my mother-in-law makes a lot, and for good reason. It makes sense.
Mhm. And
Have that tool available. If you don't need it, all right, whatever. It doesn't take very long to write a cover letter, after all.
now, do you look at a resume? Do you do like a reverse look at a Chat GPT type resume to figure that it's written a certain way, or are you just at a point now where it's still too new to really concern yourself with it?
I'll be honest. The kinds of resumes that I see, very often ChatGPT might be helpful.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Because the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, there's a lot of resumes out there, and this is not everyone's primary skill. Absolutely
Mhm.
not. Heck, I remember for a time when I was actually hiring recruiters. This is years ago, mind, years and years ago. I was hiring recruiters, and a lot of the recruiter resumes I saw were really quite poor. Like I was like, "Are you kidding me? Why, if you are supposed to be a professional who's trained at reading these, are you rubbish at writing one?" But
I have to tell you a funny story with
okay,
Leah Larson. I got a resume from someone that used to work at LinkedIn,
okay. Oh no.
salesperson.
Oh no.
And I looked at it and I was like, you're not going to probably get a job with that resume.
Mm, that's
So,
very unfortunate.
so here's a question. I think we'll end it here because it's probably a good way. Best way to
Okay.
stand out so recruiters find you beyond the standard keywords. Is there a best way?
There's probably a few. It depends on what the recruiter is doing. But let's assume, since it is a LinkedIn Live, that we're
Right.
talking about on this platform, right?
Uh huh.
Best way, easily, number one, have an all-star profile, period.
Okay.
Let's start with that. LinkedIn has been brooding about for years now the fact that all-star profiles have a higher appearance rate ranking in search results. So let's begin with that. The second thing, though, is when recruiters reach out to you, we are usually using what's called an in-mail. It is a premium service and they do not grow on trees. So there's a limited number of them, right? That recruiters have access to.
Mm-hmm.
I say this because if you comment, post, engage in some form of activity on LinkedIn, participate in conversations, that tells the recruiter who's reviewing your profile and recent activity, that's where you find that, by the way, that guess what? You actually show up here. You're not one of the millions and millions of abandoned profiles,
Mm-hmm.
which means there's a higher likelihood you're going to see my in-mail and therefore hopefully respond to it.
So, quick question here. If the recruiter contacted you via email to immediately send a brief one line, I mean, I'll let treating this a dialogue and thanking. If a recruiter contacted you via LinkedIn
Oh, that's
text,
good, Elliot. That's very good. Thank you, by the way.
yeah,
Elliot, if you have the number, look, I don't think that there's a recruiter alive who doesn't text.
Okay.
All right. Um, we love immediacy. Love, love, love it. Um, we love it more than sending in mails. Actually, we love a lot of things more than sending in the email.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know. I started texting recruiters towards the end too because
mhm.
I figure as long as you're putting their cell there, I mean, I'm not going to inundate them like
Right.
crazy. But sometimes you're busy doing 500 different things, and the last thing you're thinking about is going
That,
onto a LinkedIn for a message or something.
that, that right there. It's the immediacy. It's cutting through the
Right.
noise of the inbox. Like up until a couple weeks ago, I used to be a zero inbox guy.
Really.
Do you have any idea how hard that is as a recruiter? Any?
Well, it's got
Because
to be a lot harder for me because I have about 200 in my inbox right now, and they just keep getting inundated.
yeah, I'm sitting on something like 2 dozen right now in my inbox, and most of it's stuff that came in over the weekend that I have to still respond to in a meaningful way.
So,
Um,
can people connect with you on LinkedIn? And if they can,
yep,
what do you suggest they do? Because I don't want you to get inundated with a lot of
that's fine.
or follow or something. Yeah.
Follow is always going to be easiest
Okay.
because the odds are actually high. That's probably the best ROI for anyone who's attending today.
Okay.
Okay, because I am not a lion. I don't believe in just willy nilly connecting with anybody.
Right.
That's not my thing. All right. I know that's not your way either, Ken.
It is far from my way.
Yeah,
I
I know.
have so many less connections than I do followers
Oh
because
yeah, and
that's just the way I feel. And I actually
right,
remove connections all the time.
right. I need to be more disciplined about that someday, but that day is not today.
Well,
So
no, but
short answer,
that was a pandemic thing I did actually. If truth be told, that
fair
was a
enough.
pandemic activity I did one day. I went through and I said, "Why do I still have these connections from 15 years ago? Who are they? Why are they? They probably don't
Right,
even know I exist anymore. They may not have me around." So it was
right.
just one of those things.
So the short answer to the question, Elliot, yeah, if you have the number, absolutely do text. Always, 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 never be afraid to initiate contact.
Mhm.
Always initiate contact if you have a question. All right, that is absolutely essential because if you have a question, and especially if it impacts your candidacy, we want to know about it. We want to address it. And the fact that I've got half a dozen calls to make doesn't change the fact that you still need your information on your timetable, which may not necessarily
Absolutely.
align with mine,
No.
right?
And if I'm in a situation where I have multiple job offers and I do have multiple job offers and I really want your job,
Right.
that's a big part of it too. And you don't want to lose me if I'm
Right.
that close. But if you've lost me, you want to be able to go to the next person.
Well, okay, yeah, true. But more importantly, I want to position the job seeker to make the best informed choice. Now, if you have multiple offers that you're contending with, it is possible that my option, the job that you and I have been talking about, may not necessarily be best for you.
Hmm.
You know, I can tell you why I think it does make the most sense, even though maybe it doesn't pay as much, right? Or maybe it's a different scale of scope of responsibility. There may be reasons why this makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay. But at the end of the day, the job seeker still has to make the best decision that suits them, right? It's best for you and your lifestyle and your home. That's it.
Right. So one final question: how do you feel about someone who has different jobs on their profile? They've gone 6 months here, 6 months there. Do you care? Does that put up a red flag? Is it relating? I mean, again, we kind of both have talked about this all different ways.
Yeah, we have.
But I'd just be curious, what's the best way to portray yourself that way?
So this answer changed as of 2020
Okay.
radically. Now, Ken, like we talked about earlier, having originally come out of being a job seeker for a while before becoming a recruiter, got some sympathy. All right. But when I put my recruiter hat on, up until 2020, if you're talking about a succession of jobs that were relatively short term, like 6 months or less, and were never really interrupted by a long stint, a meaningful tenure of like 2 years or more
Hmm.
at another place, then yeah, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt your viability when I put your resume in front of any hiring manager anywhere.
Hmm.
Because what's going to roll through their head, that dreaded phrase, job hopper, right? But here's why it changed in 2020. Because just like in 2009, having a job became a status symbol because very few people had one. Everyone understood. And then in 2021, the Great Resignation, we called it, right? Because the people who did still have a job were like, okay, I am fed up with having to do the work of 5 people, right? Because everyone who was working at that time had this frustration.
Mhm.
And there's people who are hiring now, so you can take this job and shove it, buddy. And there was a lot of that happened in
Right.
2021, right? And then there's a lot of buyer's remorse that happened in late 21 and early 2022. And do you see where I'm going with
Yeah,
this?
I do. I think now it's become a lot of places also overhired for the time, and now
Yeah.
they have to cut back because the change there have been changes, and it's just the way it is. But
Yeah. Right. And we've seen that certainly in tech for the last year.
tech for sure, absolutely. I see that left and right.
Yeah. But I
Well,
think that's probably true to a lesser extent of other industries as well.
well, it's in retail too. So Ed, I want to
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much, Ed, for the chat today. I really, really appreciate this. It's been
Absolutely my
such a long
pleasure.
time.
We were we were overdue, Ken. It was
Yes,
thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
and we will chat again sooner rather than later. Again.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone. Have a great 4th of July and a great celebrated
Bye
Canada
all.
Day. Bye.